Welcome to the Moneyball Clinic. I took the top 30 leagues, simulated them in full detail, then smashed it all together to create an aggregated database. This will be the baseline from which I'll be taking a look at a different team each episode, analysing their squad, creating a simple tactic, and using performance data to suggest practical transfer targets. Today, we're getting a little fruity, as we head to the home of the bitter orange. No, not Florida, Seville. Those who follow La Liga will know that things have been pretty bleak for Sevilla this season. At time of recording, they linger just above the relegation zone as Sergio Ramos's homecoming has proven to be as bitter as the produce they are famous for. It's a very different story in FM. Predicted to finish 5th, they are there or thereabouts consistently, finishing between 5th and 7th in every single simulation. They were unable, however, to crack the top 4 and secure Champions League qualification for the following season, and so that will be our aim. A cursory glance at average performance shows that Sevilla's biggest shortcoming was their defence. Whilst they scored on average the 5th most, they conceded the 11th most, and this will probably be our area of focus as we look to push them into the top 4. Let's start by taking a look at the squad. I've loaded up the save that most resembles their average season, and it looks like they played a 4-2-3-1, a little like this under manager Diego Alonso. Marko Dimitrovic is the number 1. With Bono departing for Saudi Arabia, the Edge took over goalkeeping duties and was a bit shit. Conceding 1.4 goals per game with an XG prevented of -0.11, this is an area we can look to improve. Ahead of him is a veritable retirement home of defenders. At the centre, Sergio Ramos and Tanguy Nianzou. Ramos is old enough to be Nianzou's father, but calling him Daddy Sergio just felt wrong. Their outputs were rather similar. Nianzou won more tackles, Ramos scored more goals, and that probably accounts for the disparity in average rating. Both players registered high dribbles per 90, showcasing their ability to break the lines by carrying. Jesus Navas and Marcos Acuna were both deployed as complete wingbacks. Alongside such dribble-happy centre-backs, I can now see why this defence was so leaky. Both were more than adequate going forward, but Navas's defensive production definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Adria Pedrosa and Marcao both played significant minutes through the season, and both showed a considerable drop-off compared to the player they replaced. In the pivot, we find Fernando and Rakitic. It wasn't hard to find them. Both start the season aged 35, and they no longer have the pace to hide before a countdown is complete. As an anchor, Fernando did the things you'd want him to do. He won the ball, and he kept it safe. Rakitic's output is very similar, but he was deployed as a deep-lying playmaker, yet only marginally more progressive, and actually registered fewer expected assists per 90. Gudei was also in the rotation, and like Pedrosa and Marcao earlier, the drop-off is noticeable. Into the attacking midfield strata, and we finally have some youth. And by youth, I mean players who start the game under 30. Just. Lucas Ocampos takes the headlines, with 17 goal contributions, but the underlying numbers tell a different story. Ocampos, as an inside forward, was a volume shooter, who underperformed his XG, and despite registering 7 assists, his chance creation was actually rather infrequent. Suso had a similar goal contribution in almost half the minutes, and was also a very dribbly boy. Surprisingly, as a left footer playing on the right, he was deployed as a winger. It was a similar story for his understudy, Dodi Luca Bacchio. Luca Bacchio is definitely more comfortable as a striker, shown by his phenomenal XG overperformance, but didn't really contribute much else. Oliver, who looks like his Dickensian namesake all grown up, was rather disappointing. His attacking contribution was the footballing equivalent of gruel, and for some reason, manager Diego Alonso kept on asking for some more. He did win the ball back a lot though.
You gotta pick a pocket or two.
Up front, we have Youssef En-Nesyri. The Moroccan striker needs little introduction, and his 15 goals from 7.8 XG shows his value at the tip of the formation. He was used as an advanced forward, and so there are little expectations from him to contribute much in other phases of the game, and it's a little concerning that he seems to be feeding off scraps, but we know that if we improve our chance creation, he will score. Now this will come as no surprise, as I've already laboured the point up until now, but this is a squad very much in its twilight. 19 players aged 26 plus, and a whole host of them who didn't get much game time at all. This is something we'll need to address when it comes to transfers a little bit later. But first, what are we going to do tactically? Same disclaimer as before. Part of this series is to provide a simple tactic based on what we've learnt about the team and the players that could serve as a base for you to build upon. I'll be simulating 3 of my suggested transfers at the end of this video, but anything suggested here can be improved by making adjustments to what you see in game. With that out the way, here it is. It might seem like a drastic change, considering Sevilla's 4-2-3-1 was doing quite well, but realistically all I've done is swapped out the underwhelming Oliver for another defender to create a 3-4-3. The wingers will cut inside at different depths, whilst our wingbacks, unburdened from some of their defensive responsibilities, will provide the width. We'll use a complete forward to get En-Nesyri more involved. A positive mentality, and we look to build up from deep. In transition, we'll counter-press. I will probably say this in every single episode. It's the best time to win back the ball, and we have bodies forward. We will also encourage the goalkeeper to distribute short, because we're building up from deep. Out of possession, we'll be aggressive. A high defensive line and line of engagement, as we want to be on the front foot and overwhelm the opposition. If we can stop them from settling into a rhythm, we can dictate the game. Player instructions are mostly simple. The wingbacks stay wide. The defensive 7 tackle harder. The inverted winger sits narrower, roams from position, and takes more risks. He is essentially a playmaker without the playmaker mechanics. I've done a single test to see how this gets on before we make any transfers, and we are pretty much on par with the AI. Compared to the average, we tallied the same amount of points, but finished 1 place higher, scored 1 goal fewer, and conceded 3 fewer. This is encouraging, and with a few well thought out transfers, I'm confident we can take it further. It's only the 2nd episode, but I'm already breaking the rules. The plan was to only focus on players who would immediately become starters, allowing us to assess incoming values and wages against the players they'd be replacing. But Sevilla present a very different challenge, with an ageing and imbalanced squad that needs depth and succession planning. So before we can talk transfers, we need to talk finances. In general terms, Sevilla are in a healthy position. 43.5 million euros in the bank, 13.5 million euros in transfer debt. We have a transfer budget of 5 million euros, but currently overspending on wages, albeit only just. Wages and the allocation of them across the squad will be key here. I've recreated the squad planner to show the spend by position, with a couple of second team players promoted for depth. Now if we take the wingers here, we can see that we spend 218,000 euros per week on 6 players. This made sense for a team playing a 4-2-3-1, where 3 of them would be on the pitch at any time. In a 3-4-3, however, this is a lot of resources allocated on players that aren't going to play, and could be more useful spent elsewhere. Now the goal isn't to distribute wages equally amongst positions, but to be aware of how things are divided so we can understand where money needs to be allocated from and to for the betterment of the whole squad. Knowing that we are currently overspending and need to address some areas to launch our campaign for a top 4 finish, it's time to wield the axe. All the players highlighted are in the final year of their contract. Rakitic and Navas are adored by the fans, and their wages are prohibitively high for anyone to consider buying. Sergio Ramos is a new arrival. Ocampos is quite good. They are all safe. Eric Lamela is not. He couldn't get into the starting lineup under Diego Alonso, and his wages are in that perfect place of being too high for his squad status, but not too high to deter potential bidders. I don't expect we'll get his market value of 20 million euros in the first transfer window, but we should be able to get something. Oliver is also likely to be listed. His wages are reasonable, but his performances were not. He's unlikely to earn a new deal, and so I'd rather cash in now, if we can. Fernando can leave too. He's still a good player, but I prefer Goudet as a starter, and Djibril Sow is more than capable backup in this position. Boubacar Samare is on loan from Leicester, and for a player we neither own nor consider a starter, his wages are rather high.
You said it, the rent is too damn high.
If we can, we'll consider terminating his loan. That's the expiring contracts, but I'm not done there. I've already mentioned that we need to improve upon Dimitrovic, and so I'd be keen to cash in on him before his market value drops as a result of not playing. Finally, Joan Jordan starts the game on the transfer list, and I see no reason to change that. There were tears, there always are, but we managed to get some teams to bite. Dimitrovic was the first out the door, for €8.5 million to Al Shabab. Lamela departed to Ajax for €15 million a few days later. Fernando heads to Marseille for a shade over €1 million, and Oliver can consider himself at home
Consider yourself one of the family.
at Sociedad after an €11.5 million move. We weren't able to find anyone to take Joan Jordan off our hands, but we did receive loan offers for Dodi Lukebakio and Federico Gattoni, who head to Newcastle and Torino respectively. In both cases, their full wages are covered, and we received modest loan fees on top to generate some extra income. Finally, Samare was sent back to Leicester. All in all, that's 7 players gone, 5 of them permanently, which means we can start spending. The first port of call is a new goalkeeper. It's unlikely that we'll find an improvement on Dimitrovic, who will accept less than his €21,500 per week wage. But we should be able to find someone with a transfer value below €8.5 million. Edgar Badia might be the most hipster suggestion I ever make. At 5'11", Badia does not have the physical frame you would expect from a top keeper. He joined Elche 6 years ago, helping them earn promotion to La Liga in his second season, and to keep them in the top division for the following 3 too. He's a marked improvement on Dimitrovic in every metric, but his propensity to start counterattacks doesn't necessarily gel with the desire for us to build up from the back. Barcelona number 2 in Iñaki Peña could be the option here. Standing a staggering 1 inch taller than Badia, the 24-year-old could be ready to become a starter at another club, and his performances in relief during the simulations are very encouraging. 0.24 XG prevented is a phenomenal return, as is the 0.81 goals conceded, but must be tempered by the fact he is playing for Barcelona. Averaging just 2 saves per game, he is not the busiest of keepers, but when called upon does well. Barcelona are considered rivals though, and this will inflate his transfer fee. My recommendation, perhaps surprisingly, is Las Palmas' Alvaro Valles. It would be a big step up from the second division, and his goalkeeping metrics pale in comparison to the previous suggestions, but that is in part because he plays behind a far worse defence. More importantly, these metrics are an improvement on Dimitrovic, and the positive XG prevented shows that he is still a reliable shot stopper. The big appeal here, however, is his in-possession numbers. Completing nearly 29 passes per 90 at a 90% completion rate indicates his value and build-up. He has more involvement than the other candidates, yet loses possession less frequently. A fee of €2.3 million and €12,000 per week in wages is all that was required to bring him into the fold. Our remaining targets are going to be squad players who will provide options for rotation and help us transition in the future from some of our aging stars. Let's start with a left winger. With Lamela and Oliver sold, our options are thin in wide areas, and we specifically need someone to back up Ocampos. Alvaro Jallo is a Spanish winger who made his breakthrough at Braga last season. With his frightening pace, he's a threat in behind, but is also surprisingly adept at progressing the ball through passing, with his 3.21 progressive passes per 90. Whilst his goal-scoring exploits have been underwhelming, possibly due to his propensity to shoot from distance, his 0.16 expected assists per 90 is a considerable improvement on Ocampos, and might offer an interesting change in profile. At 24, he will soon be entering his peak, and there are question marks about whether he will improve further. If development capacity is important, then maybe Lucas Asadi is the man. The 19-year-old currently plays for Universidad de Chile, but was regularly purchased by RB Salzburg in the simulations, which is where this performance data is taken from. He is a dribbly boy. In fact, the dribbliest, racking up an impressive 3.32 successful take-ons per 90. His XG over performance is also very encouraging, and his 0.18 expected assists per 90 is evidence of his creative capacity. There are concerns though. His tendency to play killer balls often is not what I want from my inside forward, who should, ideally, be our secondary goal threat in our tactic. Whilst he has proven he can make the step up from Chile to Austria, there are questions as to whether he can go even further and make the step up to La Liga at this stage in his career. Whilst he won't be a regular starter, I do want someone who will regularly be involved. Which brings me to Jakub Kaminski. The 21-year-old Polish winger might have the least impressive looking pizza chart of the three, but there are a couple of things that stand out. He has the best pass completion rate, and despite losing possession more frequently than the other candidates, this is largely because Wolfsburg deployed him as a winger when crossing is not his strong suit. His XG underperformance is negligible, and he is doing it in a top 5 league. His lack of traits will make it easier for us to mould him into the profile of player that we want. He's not cheap. 12 million euros and 55,000 euros per week in wages might seem steep, but for the role I expect him to fill, essentially our third choice wide man, I consider that reasonable. I should also add that we got Ocampos to sign an extension on 63,000 euros per week. Finally, a deep-lying playmaker. Despite being unable to sell Joan Jordan, I do not expect him to end up as some remarkable redemption story who propels himself into being a key part of the team. So we need a backup to Rakitic, who could eventually become his successor. Adrian Bernabé is a 22-year-old former Barcelona and Man City youngster, currently plying his trade for Parma in Italy's Serie B. A tempo setter who is particularly efficient at breaking the lines, with approximately 11.4% of his successful passes being progressive. He is safe with the ball, but not in a manner that sacrifices creativity. Like others mentioned already in this video, the question is whether he can make that step up to La Liga. There is also the question of whether, having finally left big clubs to become a starter, he would be willing to accept a smaller role. And so my recommendation is one I passed on in the Wolves episode. Vicente Pizarro is a 20-year-old Chilean who starts the game at Colo-Colo, but doesn't necessarily stay there long. The data here is aggregated from simulations where he moved to Celtic and Bologna. There was little difference between him and Bernabé. Pizarro has a better turnover differential, possession loss subtracted from possession won, but carries less of a goal threat. As a model citizen aged 20, I have high hopes he could become a legend for the club. 5 million euros and 11,000 euros per week is enough to get the job done. And that concludes our activity. 7 players out, 3 players in. Net profit of 19.5 million euros and 157,000 euros per week saved. The squad has been streamlined, and that could prove particularly risky in the wide areas, especially if we have a deep run in the Copa del Rey and Champions League. Before I forget, we need a succession plan for Jesus Navas, but I feel we have enough for this season. Which is fortunate, because my number 1 target is currently out on loan and wouldn't be able to join until next summer anyway. So that's what I've done. Byron Castillo is a 24-year-old Ecuadorian, currently on loan at Pachuca, who will be joining us next summer for 5 million euros. We won't get to see how that pans out, so not sure why I did it, to be honest. So how did we do? third, third again, fourth, third, and fifth. The final simulation, our worst performance, saw us amass 68 points, which was 2 more than the AI's best season. Let's average this out and compare. A massive improvement. We scored 13 more goals, conceded 8 fewer, helping us pick up a further 13 points per season. I was surprised by our attacking output, considering our formation change essentially swapped an attacking midfielder for a centre-back, in the hopes of providing us with greater defensive security. Obviously the latter happened too, so all in all, great stuff. Let's take a closer look at Alvaro Valles. First up, the final simulation, his worst season. He conceded 1.16 goals per game, which is 0.07 more than expected, and it was the only time we finished outside the top 4. I started here because I just wanted to compare his worst performance to Dimitrovic. The difference is still night and day. Now for his best season. 0.17 XG prevented is a thing of beauty, and it's crazy to think we signed him for less than €2.5 million. Assessing Pizarro and Kaminsky, however, is where things start to get a little funky. The AI is not great at squad rotation when in holiday mode, and this is, in part, my fault. The criteria I use to identify and sign players does not necessarily align with the game's assessment of them. I can't put them in the starting lineup as they were not signed to be starters, but if I don't, then they don't play. There is therefore only one solution. I will play through the season using instant result. To try and maintain consistency over other facets, all other responsibilities will be delegated to my staff. I will holiday between games, set the lineup, then hit instant result. Now before we go any further, I expect us to perform better in these circumstances. I can make decisions about when to rotate based on the upcoming schedule, and be more considered about those changes. For example, in the simulations I set up the defence because I wanted specific players in specific roles, and Jesus Navas to stop the AI using him as an inverted winger. Now if I was to rest Sergio Ramos, I will move Barde into the wide centre-back spot, Nianzou into the central defender spot, and Marcao would come in as the ball-playing defender. I'm also able to react better to player form, and ride the proverbial hot hand when it comes. With that all said, perhaps it's a disappointment that we still finished third. Had it not been for a late season collapse, however, losing 3 of our last 5 games, we could have been champions, and did amass more points than any of the other simulations. Our defence was immense, conceding only 27 goals all season. But the reason we did this was to take a look at Pizarro and Kaminsky when they are used in a proper rotation. In just shy of 1600 minutes, Pizarro was a solid contributor. 3 goals and 3 assists is a decent return. He was less secure in possession, which on initial glance you might think is a byproduct of the step up to La Liga, but this is more indicative of the system we play. Here is Rakitic for comparison. Very similar statistical output, and that suggests that Pizarro can be the successor we need. On to Jakub Kaminsky, and I can't express just how happy I am with how this turned out. 14 goal contributions from 2,000 minutes might not be sensational, but I don't expect sensational from a backup. What makes me happy is that we identified the reason why his possession loss numbers were poor for Wolfsburg, and why that wasn't a cause for concern with what we want him to do. He has fewer successful dribbles, but is generating more chances, taking more shots, and outperforming his XG. He is just a little step down from Campos, who was sensational by the way, finishing as our top scorer, and that's exactly what I want from a rotational piece. So what do you think? Would you have signed one of the other options, or possibly kept Lamela around for his final year? Let me know below. As before, I've added links to each simulation in the description, along with a tactic. See you next time.